On the windswept plains of ancient Mesopotamia, two worlds prepared to collide. One was an empire forged by centuries of conquest, a titan of the known world. The other was led by a boy king whose ambition burned brighter than the desert sun. On this single day, the fate of empires, the course of history itself, would be decided in the Sands of Gaugamela. It is the 1st of October, 331 BC. Before the first light even touches the horizon, Alexander of Macedon stands beneath a silent, star-filled sky. He is just 25 years old, yet his name is already a legend whispered from Greece to Egypt. His armor gleams in the flickering light of countless campfires, his eyes fixed firmly on the east. Across the vast, flat plain lies the army of Darius III, the King of Kings, ruler of the mighty Persian Empire. It's a force so immense, so sprawling, that it seems to swallow the earth itself. The sheer scale is staggering, a sea of men and banners waving in the pre-dawn heat haze. For Darius, this battle is about defending his destiny, his birthright to rule the world. But for Alexander, this is history, and he is the one holding the pen. The numbers are almost comically one-sided. Historians estimate the Persians outnumbered the Macedonians by as much as 5-1. Over 200,000 soldiers against Alexander's 47,000. Darius had brought the full might of his empire to bear. He commanded war elephants, towering beasts of destruction, and his infamous scythed chariots. These were terrifying weapons, chariots with razor-sharp blades extending from their wheels, designed to carve through ranks of infantry like a farmer cutting wheat. The sound of their wheels alone was enough to break a lesser army's will. Yet Alexander knew that numbers alone do not win battles. He possessed weapons far more potent: discipline, strategy, and an unshakable belief in his own destiny. His men weren't just soldiers. They were veterans, hardened by years of campaigning, and they trusted their king implicitly. Alexander's genius was not just in leading a charge, but in his revolutionary battlefield strategy. He arranged his men in a formation that looked bizarre on paper, almost like a hammer ready to swing. His right flank was deliberately extended, angled back, creating a refusal of his own line. His elite companion cavalry, the finest horsemen in the world, were held in reserve, waiting, coiled like a spring for the perfect moment to strike. His plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. He didn't intend to fight Darius's army head-on. He intended to fight Darius himself. He pointed toward the center of the vast Persian lines, where the King of Kings was stationed, surrounded by his royal guard. That was the target. To Alexander, there was no victory without risk, and no glory without attempting the impossible. As the sun rose, the earth began to tremble. The pounding of drums, the blare of trumpets, and the roar of tens of thousands of men filled the air as the Persian charge began. Dust rose from the plains like a wall of fire. The sky darkened as a storm of arrows rained down on the Macedonian lines, a black rain over golden sand. Through it all, Alexander rode forward, a beacon of confidence. His companions, his closest friends and generals, thundered beside him. It was a chaotic symphony of bronze, blood, and destiny. The dreaded scythed chariots roared toward the Macedonian phalanx. But instead of breaking, the disciplined soldiers did something incredible. The phalanx parted, creating channels in their ranks. The chariots, their momentum unstoppable, charged harmlessly through the gaps and into a trap of waiting javelins, their primary weapon nullified in a brilliant display of training and courage. Then, through the swirling dust and chaos, Alexander saw it. A gap. A momentary weakness in the Persian center, created as Darius's left flank cavalry was drawn out to attack Alexander's right. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With a war cry that echoed across the plain, Alexander lifted his sword and wheeled his companion cavalry into the charge. He didn't hesitate. He led from the front, a storm unleashed, aimed directly at the heart of the Persian army, straight for Darius. Behind him, his cavalry followed, an unstoppable wedge of steel and fury. The shock was immense. Darius, a king who ruled from a throne, not a saddle, saw this demigod charging directly at him. He panicked. In that single, decisive moment, the King of Kings turned his royal chariot and fled the field. And with him, an empire that had stood for 200 years began to crumble. As the day ended, a profound silence fell over the battlefield. The setting sun cast long shadows over a scene of utter devastation, the air thick with smoke and dust. When it finally settled, the sands of Gaugamela were soaked in legend. An estimated 40,000 Persians lay dead, their grand army shattered and scattered. Incredibly, the Macedonians had lost fewer than 1,000 men. Alexander stood over the plain, not with wild celebration, but with a quiet, burning triumph in his eyes. His gaze was already moving past the battlefield, looking east toward the riches of Babylon, the splendor of Persepolis, and the unknown lands beyond. The world was now open before him. On that day, a single man reshaped the map of the ancient world. The Persian Empire, the greatest civilization of its age, fell before the will of one mind, one unyielding destiny. Gaugamela was not just a battle. It was not just a victory. It was the moment in time when Alexander the Great became eternal. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into ancient history, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more epic stories. See you next time. On the vast, windswept plains of Mesopotamia, two worlds were about to collide in a confrontation that would echo through eternity. One was the Persian Empire, a titan forged by centuries of conquest, stretching from the Indus to the Nile. The other was a young king from Macedon, whose ambition burned brighter and hotter than the desert sun. On this single day, the fate of the ancient world, the course of history itself, would be decided in the Sands of Gaugamela. It is the 1st of October, 331 BC. Long before the first rays of dawn touch the horizon, Alexander of Macedon stands beneath a silent, star-filled sky. He is just 25 years old, yet his name is already whispered like a legend across continents. Behind him, the campfires of his army flicker like scattered stars against the dark earth. A small but fiercely loyal force, steeled by years of campaigning at his side. Across the plain, stretching as far as the eye can see, lies the army of Darius III, the King of Kings, ruler of the mighty Achaemenid Empire. It is a force so immense, so vast, that it seems to swallow the very earth it stands upon. Banners of 100 nations wave in the growing light, a sea of soldiers, cavalry, and beasts of war. For Darius, this battle is the culmination of his power, a moment to crush the audacious upstart from the west. This is destiny. But for Alexander, this is history, waiting to be written. The sheer numbers were staggering, almost laughably one-sided. Historians estimate the Persian forces at over 200,000 men, a colossal assembly drawn from every corner of the empire. Against this behemoth, Alexander's army numbered barely 47,000. The Persians outnumbered the Macedonians and their Greek allies by at least 5-1. And Darius hadn't just relied on numbers. He had brought his most terrifying weapon, war chariots armed with long, sharp sides extending from their wheels, each one designed to carve through infantry ranks like a farmer harvesting wheat. As the sun began its climb, you could almost hear the tension. The tightening of shield straps, the sharp intake of breath from men staring at the impossible odds arrayed before them. Yet Alexander remained calm. He knew, with a certainty that bordered on the divine, that numbers alone do not win battles. True victory is forged from other metals. Discipline, strategy, and an unshakable belief in the man leading you. Those were Alexander's true weapons. He began to arrange his men not in a conventional battle line, but in a formation that was a masterpiece of tactical genius. It was designed to be both a shield and a spear. He organized his infantry into an oblique line, refusing his left flank to draw the Persians in, while massing his elite cavalry on his right, angled forward like the head of a hammer, poised to strike. His plan was not to defeat Darius's massive army piece by piece. His plan was to go for the head of the snake. He intended to fight Darius himself. As he rode along his lines, his gaze was fixed, not on the endless ranks of soldiers, but on one specific point in the distance, the center of the Persian formation, where Darius stood surrounded by his royal guard. The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. It required perfect timing, unbreakable nerve, and the willingness to gamble everything on a single decisive moment. But for Alexander, there was no victory without risk, and no glory without attempting the impossible. As dawn broke fully, the earth itself began to tremble. The battle began not with a trumpet call, but with a low, guttural roar that grew into a deafening thunder as the entire Persian line surged forward. The air grew dark, not from clouds, but from a storm of arrows, a black rain descending upon the Macedonian shields. At the forefront of the charge were the scythed chariots, their drivers screaming war cries as they barreled towards the phalanx. But Alexander had prepared his men. Instead of a solid wall, the infantry opened their ranks, creating channels in their formation. The chariots, their momentum unstoppable, plunged into these traps, where they were surrounded and systematically destroyed. The terrifying weapon had been neutralized. Then, through the swirling dust and chaos, Alexander saw it. As the Persian left wing swung wide to envelop his flank, it created a momentary gap, a weakness near the center of their line. It was the moment he had been waiting for. Lifting his sword high, his voice ringing out over the din of battle, he let out a war cry and spurred his horse, Bucephalus, into a full gallop. He was a storm unleashed, a blur of bronze and iron, charging straight for Darius. Behind him, his elite companion cavalry followed, a wedge of unstoppable force, thundering across the plain like demigods of war. They crashed into the Persian lines with an impact that shattered their cohesion. The fighting was brutal, hand-to-hand, a whirlwind of steel and desperation. But the Macedonians, led by their king, were relentless. They carved a bloody path directly towards the royal standard. And it was there, in the heart of his own army, that Darius III, the king of kings, saw Alexander cutting through his personal guards. He saw the fire in the young king's eyes. And in that single world-altering moment, Darius panicked. His royal chariot, the symbol of his power, was seen turning, breaking from the fight, and fleeing the battlefield. The king was running, and with him, an empire began to crumble. The sight of their leader abandoning them shattered the morale of the Persian army, and what had been a battle turned into a rout. When the dust finally settled and a grim silence fell over the plain, the sands of Gaugamela were soaked in blood and legend. The scale of the victory was almost unbelievable. It is said that over 40,000 Persians lay dead. The Macedonians, who had faced an army 5 times their size, had lost fewer than 1,000 men. Alexander didn't engage in wild celebration. He simply stood surveying the field, his gaze already fixed east. Babylon, Susa, Persepolis. The heart of the Persian Empire and all the riches of Asia now lay open before him. The world was his for the taking. On that day, a single man, through sheer force of will and strategic brilliance, reshaped the map of the ancient world. The Persian Empire, the greatest superpower of its age, a civilization that had endured for 2 centuries, fell before the ambition of one mind, one destiny. The Battle of Gaugamela was not just a battle. It was the moment that Alexander the Great ceased to be a king and became eternal. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into the past as epic as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories from history.